Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Wednesday that U.S. President Donald Trump is living in a Russian disinformation space regarding his comments Tuesday about the Ukrainian leader's approval rating. According to Assosicted Press, Trump said Tuesday at Mar-a-Lago that Zelensky's rating stood at 4%. Zelensky replied in a news conference in the Ukrainian capital Kiev that, "We have seen this disinformation. We understand that it is coming from Russia." He said that Trump lives in this disinformation space. Zelensky responded to Tuesday's meeting between American and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia, saying that discussing their bilateral issues is their right. "Although I believe that the United States of America is helping President Vladimir Putin to come out of years of isolation," he said. "No one is irritated, look. We are ready for anything. The story that 90% of all aid comes from the United States, we understand that, well, the truth is slightly different, although, of course, we are grateful for the assistance." Earlier, Zelensky said that about 34% of all weapons in Ukraine are domestically produced, over 30% of support comes from Europe, and up to 40% from the United States. "And that is why I would like Trump's team to be more truthful. Because all of this certainly does not have a positive impact on Ukraine. But it does help bring Putin out of isolation," Zelensky said.
Раз вже говоримо про 4%, ми бачили цю дезінформацію, ми розуміємо, що вона йде від Росії, ми розуміємо це і у нас є докази, що ці цифри вони обговорюються між Америкою і Росією. Ну, тобто, на жаль, президент Трамп, з великою повагою до нього відносимося як до лідера народу, який ми дуже поважаємо, американський народ, який нас постійно підтримує, на жаль, живе в цьому дезінформаційному просторі. Дуже важлива Мюнхенська конференція, було багато зустрічей, в принципі, якщо те, що вони обговорюють в Саудівській Аравії свої двосторонні питання, я говорив, це їх право. Хоча я вважаю, що Сполучені Штати Америки допомогли Путіну вийти із багатолітньої ізоляції. І через абсолютно справедливе повномасштабне вторгнення. І ніхто не роздратований. Дивіться, ми до всього готові. І історія про те, що 90% всієї допомоги – це Сполучені Штати, ми з вами розуміємо, що правда вона трішки інша, хоча, безумовно, ми вдячні за допомогу. І тому я би хотів, щоб було більше правди у команди Трампа. Бо все це впливає точно на, точно не позитивно на Україну не впливає, а впливає на те, що вони виводять із ізоляції Путіна. І багато хто з вас був, знаєте, в принципі, результати, я думаю, що важливий поштовх.
Top diplomats from Russia and the U.S. met Tuesday in Saudi Arabia to discuss improving ties and negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine, talks that reflected a major and rapid change in American foreign policy under President Donald Trump. No Ukrainian officials were present at the meeting attended by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and other senior officials. According to Associated Press, after the meeting, Rubio said Russia and the U.S. had agreed to restaff their respective embassies in Washington and Moscow and appoint high-level teams to continue negotiations. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who was also at the meeting, reaffirmed his government's commitment to ending the war but stopped short of giving any detail on how the sides plan to resolve the thorny issue of territorial concessions. "The practical reality is that there is going to be some discussion of territory, and there's going to be discussion of security guarantees," Waltz said. "Those are just fundamental basics that will undergird and underlie any type of discussion," he added. Ukraine is slowly but steadily losing ground against more numerous Russian troops in a grinding war that began nearly 3 years ago. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country won't accept any outcome from this week's talks if Kyiv doesn't take part. European allies have also expressed concerns they are being sidelined. Beyond Ukraine, the meeting had been expected to focus on thawing relations between the two countries, whose ties have fallen to their lowest level in decades.
Well, I would start by saying we've agreed on 4 principles that I think are important. The first is that we're going to appoint our teams respectively to work very quickly to reestablish the functionality of our respective missions in Washington and in Moscow. For us to be able to continue to move down this road, we need to have diplomatic facilities that are operating and functioning normally. The second point is that we're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged. The third point is to begin to work at a high level as well to begin to discuss and think about and examine both the geopolitical and economic cooperation that could result from an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, we'd have to see that conflict come to a successful and enduring end in order for that to be possible. And the last thing we agreed to is that while our teams are going to be working on all of this, the 4 of us who were here today, the 5 of us that were here today, are going to remain engaged in this process to make sure that it's moving along in a productive way.
Well, there are some underlying principles. This needs to be a permanent end to the war and not a temporary end as we've seen in the past. We know just the practical reality is that there is going to be some discussion of territory and there's going to be discussion of security guarantees. Those are just fundamental basics that will undergird and underlie any type of discussion. But I think the most important part is the President has stated his desire, his determination to end this war, to end the killing that is going on, the death and destruction that is happening as this war, goes on and on, month after month after month, in the killing fields of eastern and southern Ukraine is unacceptable. It is not in the interest of either country. It's not in the interest of the world, and certainly not in the interest of the United States and Europe. So all of those things will drive the negotiations going forward. And as you can see, President Trump is determined to move very quickly. We just had a head of state phone call, the first in years, and here we are less than a week later at the highest level of the U.S. and Russian government, and we expect to continue to drive that pace to not only end the war, but then to unlock what could be very productive and stabilizing relationships going forward.